The public sector pay rise. The government announces what it's awarding millions of people, including the police, teachers and junior doctors. Medics will get 6%, way below the 35% the British Medical Association is demanding as junior doctors in England go on strike again. We'll bring you the details and the reaction. Also ahead, the Kevin Spacey trial. The actor denies assault as he takes to the stand for the first time. How the climate emergency could change where and when people go on holiday, with temperatures in Italy set to hit 50 degrees. And 2 months since the coronation, how visitors to Buckingham Palace can already see for themselves what the King and Queen wore on their big day.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Millions of public sector workers, including teachers, junior doctors and the police, have just been told what pay rise they are being awarded. It averages at around 6%, with the government deciding to accept the recommendations from the pay review bodies. We'll have the details and reaction in just a moment. The amount is below inflation and way below what the British Medical Association is calling for. It wants a 35% pay rise for junior doctors in England. They have today begun their longest strike in NHS history. So what now? Vincent McAvenny has the details.
Across England, tens of thousands of junior doctors are again on picket lines instead of in hospital wards and clinics.
I feel like the government is sitting on their hands, burying their head in the sand, hoping that this goes away, but it won't. We know that we have no choice because the situation is unsustainable at the moment.
Why should we just leave the UK? People live in the UK, UK need doctors, pay them.
But thousands of planned appointments and operations have been postponed, with consultants, the most senior and specialist doctors, filling in to provide emergency care before they themselves go on strike for 48 hours next week. The man in charge of NHS England admits the next week is going to stretch the service.
I think everybody wants to see these disputes resolved. Pay, of course, is an issue for the government. Here at NHS England, our focus is on making sure that we can manage the disruption from strikes. But there's no doubt managing that disruption becomes harder and a bit more demoralising with each day of industrial action.
Junior doctors say industrial action is necessary to ensure the NHS staffing crisis doesn't worsen. They're demanding a 35% increase due to years of pay stagnation and brand the government's refusal to talk baffling. The government says a 35% rise is unreasonable and has accused junior doctors of putting safety at risk. NHS staff have been enjoying broad public support, but backlogs are testing that. Strikes over the last 8 months have caused 651,000 routine procedures and appointments to be rescheduled. That's contributed to a record 7.47 million people who are now waiting for treatments. For patients like Richard, whose knee surgery has been cancelled, it's a difficult time.
I feel very upset. Personally, it means that I have to wait longer for my knee. I am very upset that the doctors have been put in this position whereby they feel they have to strike.
NHS Providers, which represents trusts, has warned that coupled with the lingering impact of the pandemic, they have deep concerns over the legacy of these strikes for both patients and staff if they aren't resolved soon. Vincent McAvenny, ITV News.
We can go live now to our health correspondent Martin Stew, who's been at the Royal Berkshire Hospital all morning. Martin, first of all, on this developing story, this announcement of the pay offer, what's been the reaction to it?
Well, speaking to the chief executive here just a few minutes ago, he said he was delighted that the government have agreed to honour that 6%, an uptick from 5% that had previously been recommended. He hopes it'll help ease things and mean we have fewer strike days like today in the future. The big question is, though, is it going to be enough for the unions? The British Medical Association say to restore pay back to 2008 levels, you would need to see a pay increase of 35%, a long way away from that 6%. And for some context, in Scotland, they've just agreed a 17.5% increase over 2 years, and that has cooled off the strikes there. So it does appear like there is still quite some distance between the two parties.
Yeah, and day one of this longest strike in the NHS history for junior doctors. What's the impact at the hospital you're at?
Yeah, longest strike, as you say, 5 days. This one will run until Tuesday next week, and then we have the consultants going on strike on Thursday and Friday next week. Actually, here in the Administrative Department today, where I've been, things not too bad at all, relatively quiet. The consultants are backfilling the junior doctors as they've done before. There's a lot of experience now. They're getting used to these strikes. The big problem, though, as Vinny alluded to in his report, is those non-urgent outpatient appointments, which consistently are getting pushed further and further down the track. So far, 651,000 appointments have been cancelled as a result of strike action in the last 8 months. That is the real problem, and that is why the government and the unions need to come to some form of agreement.
Martin Stew, thank you very much. So now to that decision on the pay of millions of public sector workers, including those junior doctors. In the last half an hour, the Prime Minister has warned the trade unions the new pay offer is final. Our political correspondent Shihab Khan is in Downing Street. Look, as I've just said, a developing story. Can you tell us what the details are, how the pay rises are going to be funded and how they've been received so far?
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, the big question is how they're funded. But at the moment, what we know is that different sectors are getting different offers. Teachers, for example, getting 6.5%, police officers getting 7%, those in prisons also getting 7%. You have from Martin there, NHS staff getting a different offer altogether. It is sector by sector. The big thing here is that inflation at the moment is 8.7%. So regardless of what offer you've got, you are still getting a below inflation offer. So it is a real terms pay cut. That is something the unions will now have to go through. They'll have to put it through to their members. We know that the teaching unions have called off their strikes. They will be putting it to their members who'll get to decide whether they want to accept this vote or not. The Prime Minister, who is currently giving a press conference in number 10 behind me, he's talking about it. He made it very clear that this is a final offer, that there wouldn't be any further negotiations. Now, the question that you posed at the beginning of how it's going to be paid for, that's the big thing here right now. The government and the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been very clear that they won't be borrowing any more. This is going to have to come from existing budgets. The suggestion is, therefore, we could be seeing future cuts to frontline services. I suspect the unions are not going to be particularly happy about that if that's the strategy that the government has to go down. Ultimately, that's going to be the big fallout here. We're going to have to wait and see as the day progresses, as the finer details of how exactly these pay rises are paid for are ironed out.
We are indeed, but thank you for that initial assessment so far. Shihab Khan in Downing Street. Thank you. To the day's other news now, and the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey has begun giving evidence in his defence against alleged sexual offences against 4 men. The 63-year-old denies all the charges. Carolyn Sim has been hearing his evidence and joins me now. Carolyn, describe what happened at court this morning.
Well, this morning we heard lots of detail about Kevin Spacey's acting career and how he came to London to revitalise the old Vic Theatre, which had fallen into disrepair. And it was during his time as artistic director there that the charges against him are alleged to have happened. When Spacey was asked questions about those charges by his barrister, he answered clearly and confidently, his whole voice filling the courtroom. He was asked what he thought about one of his accusers and said he was a lad's lad. He was funny and charming and flirtatious. Over time, I began to touch him in more intimate ways. He said it did not happen in a violent, aggressive, painful way. It was not what he described. The lawyer then asked Spacey what he had thought when he was charged with sexual assault in 2022. He replied, "I was crushed. I never thought the man I knew would 20 years later stab me in the back." The court also heard that Kevin Spacey denied attending a celebrity party where his accuser claims he sexually assaulted him, saying he has a storage facility in which he keeps all of his personal records. He told the court he had Googled where was Kevin Spacey in 2005, and that search had told him he'd been in Australia when the alleged assault had happened. Well, Kevin Spacey is expected to give evidence for the rest of today and into tomorrow. He denies all 12 charges against him, which have been brought by 4 men, and the trial continues.
Carolyn Sim, thank you. The Prime Minister says the UK government is not complacent when it comes to the challenge that China presents. Rishi Sunak was responding to a report by the Intelligence and Security Committee that found Chinese state intelligence has been found to target the UK prolifically and aggressively. It criticised the UK government's response to the threat posed by Xi Jinping's government, questioning the trade-off between economic interest and security concerns. The BBC is to continue its fact-finding investigations into allegations against the broadcaster Hugh Edwards following the naming of the presenter by his wife last night. This morning it was announced the BBC's boss, Tim Davie, will be questioned in Parliament about the corporation's leadership during the crisis next Tuesday. Our correspondent Rebecca Barry joins me now. Several allegations for the BBC to now investigate.
Yeah, firstly, I think it's important to echo the words of the BBC Director General in an email to staff last night. At the heart of this are people and their families, both the people who've made the allegations and Hugh Edwards, who we now know is in hospital being treated for serious mental health issues. And it's within that context that the BBC must now resume what it's calling its fact-finding investigations. And that comes, as you say, as yet more allegations are emerging. Last night on BBC Newsnight, they reported allegations from a current and a former BBC worker who say that they received inappropriate messages from Hugh Edwards, some late at night, some signed off with kisses. Others are questioning the Sun newspaper and its decision to publish those original, very serious allegations that Hugh Edwards paid for sexually explicit images from a teenager. We now know, the police say, there was no criminal offence. The Sun newspaper have told us that in that original story, at no point did they allege criminality. They say that suggestion was made by other media outlets. They say they were simply reporting the story of concerned, frustrated parents who'd made a complaint to the BBC about the behaviour of a presenter and it wasn't acted on. I think the BBC now has to balance its duty of care to Hugh Edwards, whose mental health is fragile, and its responsibility to licence fee payers and properly investigate those allegations of inappropriate behaviour by its highest paid news presenter.
Rebecca Barry, thank you. Thousands of people are escaping India's capital as a major river continues to swell and floods submerge parts of the city. Heavy rain and landslides have killed dozens of people in the capital and across northern India this week. Meanwhile, people in New Delhi's flood-prone areas are packing up and leaving. The Yamuna River runs through the city and has risen to record levels, while other northern regions have seen a month's worth of rainfall in one day. Closer to the home, and the heatwave that's claimed at least one life and left tourists collapsing in Italy. According to Italian media, a construction worker in the northern city of Lodi died from the excessive heat this week, and several visitors in Rome fainted from heat stroke. Italian meteorologists have named the weather pattern Cerberus after a character in Dante's Inferno. It was already 34 degrees by mid-morning in Athens today. Greece has banned people from nature reserves and public buildings with air conditioning are being turned into cooling shelters. And in Romania's capital, it's the humidity that is making life uncomfortable. A wave of Saharan air blasted Bucharest. And temperatures in Spain have dipped a little but are expected to soar to new highs in the days ahead. Our correspondent John Ray is in Malaga, where many will be heading in the days and weeks ahead. John, stifling heat where you are.
Yeah, you can probably tell, Nina, just by looking at me that it is frankly unpleasant standing out in the full glare of the afternoon sun, and that's despite the fact that temperatures have come down a little. We checked the car thermometer just before we came on air, 35 degrees Celsius, still in the 90s in Old Money, and much of this country, much of Spain, has been on red or amber alert for a heat wave for the past week, and as you say, temperatures are expected to soar again. A little inland from where I am, they're going to top 41 degrees today, and in that kind of searing heat. Frankly, it is unpleasant to head to the beach, as this family of Scottish holidaymakers on holiday just up the coast in Benidorm told us a little earlier.
It's too hot. It's absolutely melting. We are ginger children and a ginger husband, so it's even hotter for us.
Now in Benidorm, they're even talking about perhaps shifting the tourist season to earlier or later in the year. Here in Malaga, we've been talking to the local weathermen, the people who monitor all this, and they tell us that these heat waves are going to get more intense and they're going to get more common as the years now progress thanks to climate change, which means in a place like this, built on tourism, they're asking a really awkward question. How hot is now too hot?
John Ray, thank you very much. Thank you. Ahead of the Women's Football World Cup, which kicks off in a week, an independent review has included the sport could one day be a £1 billion industry if there are wide-ranging reforms. Led by the former England international Karen Carney, it makes a number of recommendations. It's calling for the top 2 tiers to go fully professional. It wants to redirect some funding from the Men's FA Cup prize pot and have a dedicated broadcast slot, possibly on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Barbara Holmes has more.
It's just a week away. The world's biggest showcase of female footballing talent kicks off next Thursday. But back home, the facilities used by some teams are a far cry from the gleaming stadiums in New Zealand and Australia.
People talk to us about bin bags for curtains, no heating, which means they're in like multiple layers having meetings, or can't use certain facilities because the men are a priority and have to wait till silly o'clock at night.
Former Lioness Karen Carney has been tasked by the government to look at the future of the women's game. She's recommended making the Women's Super League and Women's Championship fully professional and creating a dedicated TV slot for women's football.
I do think we should see women's football as a start-up business that needs an injection of cash, that I do think there will be really big rewards at the end of it. I do think in the next decade it will be a £1 billion industry.
The need for funding is something London Seaward are all too aware of. The semi-professional team play in the 4th division and juggle sporting commitments with full-time jobs.
We've had to do fundraisers. We're always constantly asking for people to help support us. And, you know, like just last week, players ourselves went down to our new ground, which is Redbridge FC. And, you know, we were clearing up the changing rooms, getting ready for next season.
But it's not all about the money. It's also about changing attitudes to the women's game.
2 of my pals are 100 capped lionesses, and both their kids have come back and said girls shouldn't play football, and said it to their mum, who's played 100 times for England. So there's definitely gender bias as well, and it starts at such a young age, and we need to shift that.
Lifting standards as much of a goal as lifting trophies. Barbara Holmes, ITV News.
Finally, the ballroom at Buckingham Palace has a very special exhibition for royal fans this summer. From tomorrow until September, visitors can see for themselves the outfits worn by King Charles and Queen Camilla on their coronation day in May. Here's our royal editor, Chris Shipp.
On the morning of the 6th of May, this is the view the King and Queen would have had as they left Buckingham Palace. The Diamond Jubilee state coach they used on Coronation Day is now outside the grand entrance for members of the public to see. Britain's first coronation for 70 years is at the heart of the new exhibition, and not just the coach the King and Queen rode in, but the tunic, the dresses and the robes they wore. And now in the Palace Ballroom, those outfits can be seen up close, including lots of details many might have missed on the day. On Queen Camilla's coronation dress, for example, her 2 rescue dogs, Beth and Bluebell, are embroidered into it, as are the names of her children and grandchildren. Gus is one of them. Visitor numbers to Britain's occupied palaces are down 50% since COVID, but after such an historic royal year, international tourists are coming back.
There's been a huge amount of interest in the coronation. We've seen that in visitor figures already, booking tickets to come and see the exhibition. And I think people will really enjoy seeing the works of art in reality.
What is not on display here are the crown jewels. They are staying in the Tower of London, but 30 years since the late Queen opened the doors of Buckingham Palace to the public, it's a rare chance to see some items of royal history. Chris Ship, ITV News, Buckingham Palace.
That's it this lunchtime from me and from everyone here. Goodbye.
Not everywhere will be cold today. Some places will be warm and toasty. Heinz now added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
A very good afternoon to you. That classic combination of sunshine and scattered showers out there once more as we head through the rest of today. A little calmer than of late, not quite as blustery out there. We've got showery outbreaks at the top and tail end of the country so far. A sandwich of sunshine in between, let's say. And in the sunshine, temperatures lifted to around about 24 degrees out of the breeze. Where we've got those hit and miss showers, some of them on the heavy, potentially thundery side. They'll be slow moving through parts of Scotland and the southwest, moving through at a slowish pace from west to east. And where it stays dry, that sunshine making all the difference. Through this evening and tonight, we've got outbreaks of rain into the west. A little more cloud cover here, capping the temperatures. Signs of things are set to change across the southwest come dawn. Here, some solid, steady rain, the winds whipping up, and a soggy start to the new day. Otherwise, the best of the brightness further east, and staying very much on the mild side too.
Heinz now added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.